geography, a hatred for which I've only really begun to develop of late because I've had nothing better to think about compared to, like, before. And in thinking about it as a result of this, I realised, hang on, this is a complete waste of my time. Hear me out here, for some reason you're a pro-geography person. By the way, if you are one of the pro-geography people, leave some of your reasons behind being a geography person and put what you think is actually good about geography in the comments. And again, good luck with that. Basically, this is how it happens. It's the first geography lesson of year 7, or first year, if you're old and still refuse to accept that it's not called that anymore, and they teach you how to read a map and how to use a map scale. Okay, that's done. That's all of geography done. Now what? We'll peddle them scientific propaganda for the rest of their academic lives. Seriously, name one thing in supposed geography that isn't also a science feature. Dare I bring the rock cycle back into this channel again? Anyway, if it doesn't fit science, then it's just sociology, which I admittedly had never even heard of until it came to choosing my options, and a bazillion plus people said they were doing it, and I was like, hang on, we only got the options forms yesterday. How do you even know what it is? I've never even heard the word before. But what I do know is, according to my well-knowledgeable grandmother, sociology is...
the study of people in groups.
Which is basically just the whole social part of geography. So, geography. One more thing about it is it's just the subject equivalent of that guy. You know the one. The obnoxious little twerp that always says, well, technically, just to be annoying and awkward. And yes, Johnson, before you type in the comments a little link to this time in the video and say, coming from you. Yes, I am aware I do come up with the technicalities sometimes, but it's usually only ever to come back to your technicalities. And anyway, at least I don't say clouds technically don't exist. I don't keep saying why, until every single blatantly obvious detail of a person's reasoning has been reasoned out. Don't say geography teachers don't do this, because they just do. As if mine wasn't boringly annoying enough as it is. Plus, the subject is just painfully slow-moving. Honestly, if I see another rubbing the side of your hands together to represent the tectonic plates metaphor, good luck getting that one in the comments just to annoy me. Plus, again, it's that subject, not counting the odd science teacher who was annoyingly like this as well, who may or may not be the same one as who went through the reproductive systems a million times. Jenna, that you have to bring evidence of revision in for, and they make you do flashcards and other useless stuff like that, which... fair enough if you're the annoyingly well-organised one who does everything perfectly and a million times more work than you need to do. You know who you are, Lily. Or someone who is helped by that kind of thing. Someone who, like, flashcards help you remember stuff. But they're just totally unaware that people like me exist to whom that kind of thing are just simply not helpful. It's as simple as this. I remember stuff by writing it as satire in an enormous bland paragraph, preferably in black ink. You can't argue with me, I'm in top set for everything. Well, apart from PE, but that's not so much written in the early days, so that doesn't count. The point is, it obviously works, because they obviously got decent marks in everything, right? Somehow. I mean, how that happened with maths, sheer dumb luck, I barely even did any of the revision. But that proves that Maths Watch Online Revision doesn't work. Yeah, that's a rant for another day. Finally, and again, this is more of a personal thing, but it's the subject where you do 75% of the work on A3 paper with coloured pens. And it's like, go around the classroom and exchange what you've written and researched with the rest of the class while I stand at the front next to my unironically written in Comic Sans PowerPoint with a photo of a hamster with no fur pushing his shopping trolley, because apparently that's funny, because the whole ordeal's called Marketplace because it very vaguely resembles some kind of market and just tells the facts, even if they're pointless and annoyingly technical. You're the teacher, it's literally what you're paid to do. But can I just say that all of that was a genuine lesson task from a few months ago, if you actually caught any of it. And for me personally, no matter how much they try and flog it to you, like a load of sponsor logos at the bottom of a web page, there is no way media studies can be shoehorned in as one of these subjects. End of. I really mentioned it, have I? I don't like geography. Yeah, I know, honestly, that's all they go on about whenever they talk about the blooming hurricanes and earthquakes and stuff. That's all they go on about. Honestly, Phil Swift could be a blooming geography teacher.
Damage!
So the fact that when we actually did eventually do some maps in geography and then got tested on it, but it was still a year 7 test. So even the original bit of geography is now being ripped off from itself. Blimey, geography, how desperate are you for content that you've started ripping off yourself? I mean, I knew they liked stealing things, but I never thought they'd get as low as stealing from themselves. You don't necessarily need to know where the food or drink has come from. I mean, sometimes I guess, yeah, it can be good for, like, probably some reason. But even if you... So, first of all, you don't really need to know most of the time. Second of all, even if you for some reason do need/want to know, you can just search it and it will show you on a map, and then you can just zoom out and you're like, oh, there it is. So really, if you must compare it to a paper map, there it is. That is where that place is. So even if you're a Luddite who hates this for no reason other than the fact that it involves technology, you can do the same with the index of an atlas or a road map or map book or whatever. Ah, well, digital maps are always inaccurate and they send you off a cliff and into a canal and... Which, first of all, if you're going to follow a sat-nav into a bush and then off a cliff, it's kind of your own stupid fault. Everyone knows that they're not the most reliable things in the world. But in the defence of sat-navs, I've never had one go wrong on me. Not that I haven't used one excessively, but I've never had one go wrong. Unless it's not been updated since, like, 2015 and therefore doesn't have a pothole registered on it. But you can't blame Garmin for that, can you? That's just... Roads change. It takes them time to map the entire world and see where new roads go, and even then, surely you just drive down the new road. When you join up with the old bit of road, surely it's only like one straight bit of road. It'll just recalculate. If you can't go somewhere it tells you to go, just go somewhere else and it recalculates. Even if it sends you in a U-turn, just keep going the wrong way, eventually it'll take you some other way. So, I don't understand where this thing about sat-navs being wrong came from, because although they're being phased out, as the teacher kind of said, which is fair enough, I mean, everyone just uses phones now, because the argument he made was, well, if you just use it on your phone, that's flawed. Because when someone, it actually wasn't me, made an argument in that lesson about, well, why do you necessarily need to know it with, like, in the age of sat-navs? And he was like, well, what if you don't have any phone signal? And someone said, well, what about an actual sat-nav? And he said, yeah, they're being phased out, or something like that. They're like, you know what I mean, they're fading out. But I thought, well, that doesn't mean they don't still work. If you still have one, it's still gonna work if it's, you know, charged. And something I've literally come back the next day to record and add in, that I should have mentioned in the entire first place, was that I've looked it up a bit, and whenever you talk to people who defend geography, they always defend the maps. Like Stephen, it's like, well, how are you gonna know where you're going if you go somewhere and don't have a map? First of all, maps aren't that hard to understand. If you're not like a professional geographer, then, well, first of all, if you're a professional geographer, you probably don't know anything to do with maps at all, for reasons I'll get into later.
I'm a senior physical scientist with the...
But basic maps aren't that difficult to follow. You just find yourself on them and then just follow it. Plus with digital maps, like I've already been through it, you don't even need to follow it. It does it by itself. You don't need to find it. But and plus, if you're talking about, oh, well, you need it. Oh, you need it when you're going on holiday. You're not flying yourself unless you just happen to be a pilot. I'm a bad person. I'm the bad example person to say that. But people always defend the maps. It's as if everyone somehow, when they're not in... It seems like I am the only person who isn't blissfully unaware that 90% of geography isn't even maps. It's just the science and everything else. It's just the earthquakes and hurricanes and the rock cycle and how it affects people and the economy and the environment. It's not like... I mean, I'm not going to say there's no maps, because there is like a tiny little bit. I mean, fair enough, they're trying to justify the original bit. But that original bit should be the entire subject, albeit... I mean, that's just the lesser of the two evils. Maps still shouldn't qualify to get its own entire subject without the rip-offs, because there's nothing to it, as is shown by the such a low number of lessons that are dedicated to primarily maps and not just finding somewhere that you're going to do a hurricane or look at a hurricane and earthquake case study, example, whatever, from a country, just finding that country. Not counting that, because that's not anything to do with... That's just using a map. That's not teaching you about maps. It doesn't qualify to be its own subject, but the lesser of two evils will be that the subject is just entirely maths, and that's how everyone acts when they're defending it, but that's not what it is! As we've established, there's barely any maps in it! So, why study lakes then? Because it's obviously something important enough for the government to think that it's just as important to be taught to you guys as anything else that we teach you. They're not exactly the best at thinking what's best for anyone, are they? Anyone? Don't all come at me at once. Calm yourselves. What? Anyone? What's your point? I say it's pointless, and no one in the room can think of a reason why it's useful. How is that proving me wrong that it's pointless? Surely that's backing me up that everyone else at least can't think of why it's not pointless. What about this scenario needs that look to me, like you've proven me wrong? I just don't... What? 1 point for geography today. They said that, the teacher said that when you're revising the places on the UK map, you need to actually use the visual map to write on where the places are. And to be fair, that is the one time visual revision is necessary, when you're actually looking at where places are on something, for example a map. Just because geography have that mentality for their actual original thing, it just seems to bleed out into the rest of the stuff they do that's all rip-offs that we've established, and that's when you get all the stupid, you have to provide... Why am I still holding the wig? You have to provide visual evidence that you've revised, even though I've already been through this, watch the other video. Naming places on maps, fair enough, you need visual. Everything other than that, though, apart from maybe labelling stuff, but that doesn't really happen so much in geography, so yeah. So why is this geographical feature useful? Well, why is this useful? Oh, I'm not doing GCSE geography. I don't need to know this. 11th century immigrants are important to me, not this. I mean, aside from the volcanoes and the earthquakes, obviously, because they're just not useful. Nobody cares about them, I may have mentioned that before. And what about the people who are affected and killed by them? They don't care why and how it's happening, they just want it to stop. It looks good on your CV. Do you know what else looks good on your CV when you want to go into television writing and stuff? Having typed so many scripts that it is not even funny anymore. What made me hate geography as much as I did was largely the factor that it was it wasn't the fact I didn't like the stuff in it necessarily. I mean, obviously I didn't like most of it, like hurricanes and volcanoes and earthquakes and all the other stuff like that to do with the... and rocks, dare I even star on rocks again. Bear in mind, most of the stuff in it I didn't like, but some of the stuff I didn't hate necessarily. It just made me hate it, the fact that nobody else seemed aware that it was just science. And the factor everyone was blissfully unaware it was basically the same thing, and that it had kind of been ripped off, like I've said before, made me hate it even more. So doing the same kind of thing in a science lesson where it's branded as science doesn't annoy me, because you're doing it in science and it is science. You're not doing it in some other lesson that rips it off, presents it as original material, and everyone buys into it being original material. It's a similar situation to the old repetitivity of the reproductive systems in Year 7, when the teacher used different PowerPoints every single time, and I felt like the only one who was aware it was being repeated. That triggered me even more. It triggered me enough that it was being repeated, but it triggered me even more because everyone else seemed blissfully unaware that it was being repeated. That made me more annoyed in the same way that what I just said about geography makes me more annoyed. The fact people don't see, I've already explained it. Yeah, you get the idea. If you don't get the idea, just watch this bit again. Bye. Because if you take something like buildings are destroyed, that harms people because they don't have anywhere to live, and it also harms the economy because it means they've got to be rebuilt and no one has anywhere to get the money to rebuild them because the businesses are destroyed. See, and then because the businesses are destroyed, that's also social because it means people can't work. And it's also economic because they don't earn any money, but then it's also social because without any money the people can't do anything. Do you see what I mean? They always overlap if they're not just literally the same. Even overlap with environmental sometimes, if it's like crops or something. The crops are destroyed by the cyclone. Environmental. Therefore, people can't farm the land and make profit from it. Economic. But at the same time, people also can't eat the stuff if you're somewhere like Bangladesh, like we've been doing excessively recently, where the economy's too agriculture based, so that then causes a huge problem with people not having food, so that's also social. You see what I mean? Like, way back in the Comic Sans story when I said they're all the same thing, when you can't separate them because they're all the same. That wasn't just random. They literally, admittedly not always, they usually at least two of them, usually at least social and economic, most points can fit in social and economic equally, and then even sometimes it can fit in social, economic and environmental, so that's what I meant by that. That wasn't just a random criticism just for the sake of it. That once you've got rid of the maps, then there's the sociology, and you get that physics, and you plonk that into geography as well. So you have essentially a great big load of science, some sociology, and then a little bit of maths, which is the original bit, right? And this is where geography differs and why it is still a rip-off. If you take, going for the second closest, the second biggest thing that's bordering rip-off again, which is the physics and the maths thing. If you take the maths and the physics, where am I going with this? It's different, right? Because physics is essentially still an original thing. It just, in order to function, it requires a load of maths, which it then takes and just plonks in the middle. It's kind of like when you have a website, but you need Flash Player. How primitive am I here? But you need Flash Player for it to work, so you need that as well. You're not ripping it off, you're just using it. Geography, on the other hand, takes all of the great big amount of science and the sociology that it takes, and doesn't even credit it. At least with physics, at least it's quite obvious that it's maths that you're doing, and there's always like, yes, so because this is the stuff that you've done in maths, or that you're doing in maths, or that you're going to do in maths. At least they're always essentially crediting maths for providing that load to itself. Then there's geography, which just very, very infrequently says you may have looked at this briefly in geography as well. Other than that, it just passes it off as original information. Geography continues to spew out its propaganda as if it is completely enclosed from the rest of the outside world, and then some illegal dealer has stolen from science and sold it to geography without geography knowing they've just bought stolen goods, and is therefore passing it off as its own, blissfully unaware that it was already covered and distributed by physics. Because it was desperate and only had maps to go off. Same works with the sociology, just there's just less of it. Because they needed a bit more to... just ripping off science didn't quite make the subject big enough, so they needed a bit more. It still isn't big enough. That's the only reason I get such good scores on the tests. Even if you want to count, for some reason, every single subject as its own science, at least, aside from the obvious little overlaps here and there that vary between the subjects, they're still not very big though, at least they're all original sciences. Geography, aside from the maps, is just a blatant copy of physics' sciences. At least, even if you count everything else as its own science, at least they're all different from each other. Whereas geography's is exactly the same, with a few little bits taken out, and the maps added, and the sociology also ripped off. Thank you.